I'm happy to join this very distinguished group for just a few comments. And I want to thank the University of New Orleans and the University of North Carolina, State University, North Carolina State University, for undertaking this effort. And I know we are joined maybe by representatives from HUD and FEMA and other interested groups as we continue to keep our focus on how to better prepare for disasters that will continue to occur. And to make sure that at least at the federal level, as well as coordinating with our state and local partners, we can do a better job responding to those disasters for protection of life and property, and then, of course, do a better job of reconstruction and rebuilding. To just frame this very, very briefly, it will be almost 5 years. It will be 5 years, August 29th, when Katrina hit the Gulf Coast. And then just a month later, in September, Rita came ashore and hit virtually the same part of the Gulf Coast. And then, unfortunately, for all of us that live in that part of the world, that next year we had two additional storms, Ike and Gustav, that hit almost the same area. So it has truly been a nightmare along the Gulf Coast, from Biloxi to Galveston. And even 5 years later, between 3 and 5 years later, it is still a nightmare in many neighborhoods, on many blocks, in many communities, not just New Orleans, not just the lower Ninth Ward, not just parts of Gentilly or Pontchartrain Park, but Lakeview and Waveland and Biloxi and Galveston. And we have a lot more work to do, in my view, as a nation, to respond more quickly, and more than quickly, respond more effectively to help people regain their footing, economic footing, more quickly after a storm. I don't have to preach to this group assembled, because those of you from the University of New Orleans and from North Carolina have studied this, intently, but it is very troubling to think that when Katrina hit, in the United States government really did not have in place even the beginnings of what I would consider just a basic recovery foundation. I'll start with number one. The most a family, could receive for immediate help, I think, was $2,000, and then $26,000 for families that were displaced from their homes from anywhere from 6 weeks to 2 years. I mean, obviously, that's inadequate. There was virtually no relocation or case management plans in place. Very little mental health opportunities for communities that were literally traumatized in whole. I could go on. There was no provision in the law for 330,000 children displaced out of schools on a Friday to go to school on Monday. No legal framework as to where they would go to school, how would that be paid for. There was no legal framework of how people would, public housing, people in public housing would receive commensurate public housing in a temporary time period when that housing became uninhabitable. There was no law on the books for automatic reimbursement to cities like Houston or Baton Rouge or Arkansas that took in people. And I could go on and on and on about what was not clear in the law to respond to a catastrophic disaster. There were many things in the law that would work for your typical tornado or your typical hurricane, and that stepped in, that seemed to acknowledge that there would be a temporary, a few weeks, maybe even a few months, people being away from their places of employment or their homes. But in my view, there was nothing in the federal law that contemplated wholesale displacement of major metropolitan areas. And the sad thing is, there's still not, in the current law, a plan in the event that an earthquake would hit Memphis and 1 to 1.5 million people would be dislocated from their places of employment, their homes, etc. How, where would we find housing? Let me be the first to say that travel trailers are not the solution. Whether they have, even if they don't have formaldehyde in them, travel trailers are not a solution to house a population of 1.5 million people looking for shelter. They might work for certain neighborhoods that actually have space, driveways, single detached housing where a trailer could pull up next door and the family maybe could live, although not comfortably, for a few months while they're repairing their home, I think was the idea. But it doesn't work very well, and it won't work in New York City. It's not going to work in downtown Memphis. It's not necessarily going to work, that plan, in Los Angeles and in the densest areas. And in addition, the school issue is very important, and I'll mention why I feel it's so important. While you think after disaster, housing is the most important, and it does jump out, and of course, health and safety. But what I found, which was surprising to me after this disaster, is what my constituents wanted more than anything was for their children to be able to get back into school. And that decision drove almost every other decision of that family. It drove where they might work, where they themselves might want to locate or live, based on where children could get into school, because no family wanted their child to miss a year of school, 6 months or a year. And it became also clear to me that it was also a very important stability factor for the kids, their mental health, to be back in the most familiar setting that they could possibly be in a classroom, albeit a temporary structure, with a teacher, even if it wasn't their own teacher, but to be with a teacher back in sort of a generally familiar area, which was the only thing familiar to them since they'd lost their neighborhood, their home, their circle of friends, their church, their place of worship, their playground. Everything else was strange to them. And third point of the schools was that it actually helped the parents to be able to then have some time during that school day to actually think and work about what their rebuilding plan might be, because the governments need plans, but so do individual families and parents, and they need time to think about and argue with their insurance companies and their figure things out, their lawyer, their insurance company, and none of that could be done if you're with 2 or 3 school-age children or high school kids with nothing to do, sitting in a hotel room or in a shelter somewhere. So I just want to say and emphasize how important the school piece is. And again, I was reminded when I went to Haiti last week, where there virtually is no what we would consider a universal free public education system in Haiti doesn't exist. But there is an opportunity to create one. But even the importance of getting kids back in school to Haitians that had a limited access to a school structure is very important. So the parents themselves, who are the firefighters, who are the police officers, who are the nurses and the social workers, can get back to starting to build a community. So I just want to basically leave it there and to thank you all. We have put a few things in place that were done in a temporary fashion, Katrina only, despite my strong objection to such language in the bills that we've passed. I've asked the Congress, don't make this Katrina specific because it's going to happen again. But because of uncertainty about what is the right thing to do, concern about budget implications, some of the laws that we have on the books are no longer applicable in the event that another Katrina happens because they're very Katrina specific, Katrina and Rita specific. That is not what I wanted, but that's what exists. So what we need moving forward, many of the recommendations that you all have made here, some of which are in place, like the arbitration panel, but again, it's Katrina specific. That should be standard operating practice for all big projects that there's an argument between the federal government and FEMA and the local government in terms of if a hospital is destroyed or a major school system is destroyed or some other public big, interstate or state highway is destroyed, what the federal government and FEMA actually owes, and when there's a disagreement, to have some third-party independent arbitrator. It's working as well as we had hoped it would work in our situation, but the fact of the matter is it's not in standard law. Neither is there in standard law looking forward a way to reimburse children who would be displaced from their school. No automatic provision that kicks in to say the next time 100,000 children are displaced or 50,000 children are displaced or X, there will be, this is the procedure that will be followed. So I'm afraid if this would happen again, which I hope it won't, but it will at some point, a catastrophe of this magnitude, we're going to be back to square one, inventing these things as we go. And, any emergency manager will tell you, you don't want to be planning in the midst of executing in the middle of an emergency. But that's how we found ourselves. Making plans for the emergency while we were dealing with the emergency was not an optimal situation to be in. So I thank all of you. I think Hunt Downer is going to add some comments, and I've just hit a few. I could give you a long list of things I'm going to leave here with you as I move to my next meeting. I'll stay for a few minutes. Ben Billings has been leading this effort through our subcommittee on Homeland Security. We've gotten a tremendous amount of support from our ranking member, Lindsey Graham, from Susan Collins and Joe Lieberman. I think our committee, Homeland Security Committee, is open to hear some of these ideas, and this is a very opportune time for some of these ideas to come to the table because we passed pre-camera right after the storm, which was the most immediate and obvious changes that need to be made. But our bill, which is entitled National Disaster Response Bill, for lack of a more creative term, we are building now, and we hope to introduce it in the next, a couple of weeks, to start moving it through the process. So any ideas that you all have, this would be the vehicle that we would want to put all of our best ideas on the table, ideas that still are out there, that still need to be implemented, and be better prepared in the future when a catastrophe like this, hopefully it won't be a flood because levees have broken, hopefully we've learned that lesson, but it could be a tsunami, that hits Seattle. It could be an earthquake that hits Memphis or California, and you're back to square one, scrambling for where do our kids go to school, where do people go to work, who pays, for Medicaid, public housing, where are the triggers, where's the automatic response, communication strategies, et cetera, that failed miserably during our time. Thank you so much, and I appreciate the opportunity to share some of those thoughts. Thank you. Thank you.